So we're holding on Amud Peches at the Va'od Yesh Leim. And I think now is a good opportunity just to do a little bit of a stock taking of where we're up to, what's happening in the hemshekh, because this is a key and critical moment of the hemshekh, and what's happening now. So let's just bring ourselves up to speed, what we've done so far. We have a medrash that the Eibishter wanted to create the world Midas Adin. He saw the world was unable to maintain itself, so he mixed in Midas Harachamim. And on a similar theme, the medrash brings a mashal of the king with his cups and his hot water and his cold water, and those are all references to Midas Adin and Midas Harachamim. So we spent two Maimarim, the first and the second Maimar, explaining the concept of the term koisos in the second Medrash, which you might think is a whole separate parsha in and of itself. Really, the emphasis of the hemshekh is the first Medrash. What is Midas Adin? Why did Hashem want to create the world Midas Adin? And then, what does it mean that he had a shit of Midas Harachamim? Those are our questions on the first Medrash. Why would the Eibishter want to create the world Midas Adin if it's Teva Tov Lahativ? Why would he want to create the world Midas Adin? And then, if he did want to, what was the problem with it? And what was the solution of Shittim Mizrachim? That is what the Maimah, the Tzemach Tzedek, does. So if you look in the Maimah, the Tzemach Tzedek, on which this is miyusad on, that's what it does. The whole arichas about kois, second on the second medrash, how that and what we said about it in the first and second Maimah is not in the Maimah, the Tzemach Tzedek. So you could think that it's just sort of a digression. It's a separate thing, but really, if we're now going to ultimately get the benefit of it, we're going to really deher why what the Rebbe Rashab was doing by putting it there, and why it's strategically necessary to do what was done in the first two Maimorim. You can't start the hemshekh. You can't just learn the question at the beginning and then jump to Shuva Yisrael, and then the hemshekh will work. The hemshekh will not work.
The Maimon does work though. The Maimon with Tzemach Tzedek does work like that. Was lacking explanation.
It works, but you don't have the harchavas habiyur that enables you to really appreciate what's going on here in this Va'od Yesh Leim. So we spent two Maimarim talking about the mashal of Kais, the inyan of a makabel, and we talked about dibur, and we talked about isha, and we talked about guf, and we talked about neshamas Yisrael, and in each instance we emphasized how the makabel is mushrash in a deeper and more profound shirish than the mashpia. Because the inyan of a makabel, which is something which is, in a sense, a doimim, a metzius, sort of, and something that is, in some ways, in some sense, self-sufficient. It's not active. It's not actively pursuing any objectives. Makabel is makabel. It receives. But it has a bittul, in its active Kabbalah. But it's also, it has this notion of it being not craving any activity. A mashpia is fanuma mit hashpa. It's completely engaged with the idea of being mashpia. It has a craving, the mashpia has a craving to convey the inyanim of which it is davuk. So he said, the inyan of the mashpia is that it has a dveikus with the mokke, and therefore wants to be megalit. But it's only a ha'ara bilvad. But it's got in a state of hashpa, constant occasion. The makabel is not. The makabel is associated with dim, with cheshach, with helen, with tzimtzum. It becomes a yesh, a metzius, and in some, and that ability to be like that is itself mushrish in the fact that the Eibishter, the Yesh Amiti, is able to be like that. Okay, the manifestation of that in the Makabel, in the Metzias, is Mamash Behelim. That is Mamash Behelim in the Makabel. Look at the Makabel. The Makabel looks like garnished. It's nothing. It's insignificant. It's not. There's no dveikus, nothing at all. But if you are able, if you're maimik, if you really think about what a Makabel is, a Makabel has a koyach atzmi. For it to be the way it is, there must be in it a koyach atzmi. And that is why, when there is a hashpah from the mashpi into the Makabel is then able to impact and affect the mashpia in a way which is incoherent and inconceivable from a perspective where it is it's inferior and secondary and peripheral to the mashpia. The fact that it's able to have this hashpah, and we see the hashpah comes from dibur lagabi seichel, and dibur lagabi middays, and ish lagabi ish, and guf lagabi nefesh, and neshama yisrael lagabi Torah, and all of the examples of cases that we gave. So there's a phenomenal maila in the Makabel. It has a sheirish kodum. Yeah? And that was what we did in the first two Maimorim. When we got to the third Maimor Shavi Yisrael, we started going back to the first, we went back on track, seemingly, to what the focus is, of how can you explain why the Eibishter wanted to create the world Midas Hadin. And we gave two Pirushim, the Pirush of Shavi Yisrael, and the Pirush of Lulav Arava and B'Yemish Mni Atzeres. One that the Eibishter is very, Midas Hadin is the way the Eibishter is very strict, and Midas Hadin is in fact an intense Gilui of Elikus. It's a Gilui of Gvura, but it's a Gilui of Elikus. The way Elikus is very demanding, and what that is ma'ir in a person is the Aveda v'Aveda b'chol ma'idecha, which is hemshekh atmos and seif, and creates a dir b'tachtenim. And that's why the Eibishter wanted to create the world with Midas Hadin. Or, like it says in the Lulav Mimash Mni Atzeres, that really, in fact, Midas Hadin is the Keich HaTzimtzum, the Keich HaGbala, and it reflects the way the Eibishter is Ma'anim Master himself, in order that there can be Metzias Yesh V'Dov Nifrat, and that Metzias Yesh V'Dov Nifrat will be completely oblivious to where it comes from, completely oblivious to the Elikus that's in the world. And that will lead to an Aveda of Nisyonis. Again, an Aveda Atzmis, an Aveda that comes from Etzem and Neshama, which will in turn bring about the hemshekh of Atzmis and Seif, and a Dir B'Tachtenim, and fulfill the purpose of creation. So in both ways, for different reasons, it will achieve the same purpose. So we have two Pirushim, but we have the same sort of Mahalach. And that is why the Eibishter wanted to create the world Midas Hadin. But he saw that it wasn't going to work. Yidden were not able to live up to that level of Aveda, and there would have been no room, according to the first pshat, there would have been no room for tshuva. According to the second pshat, there would have been chatoin skiing. So there were lots of problems. And then in the sixth maimah of Eilat Ol Shemaim Va'aretz, it added not only that it would have been sort of a chaga for all the clippers. The world been created in Sai, according to the first pshat of Midas Hadin, Sai, according to the second pshat of Midas Hadin, there would have been a lot of clippers. Reishis Bar Lekim, there would have been Toyu V'Cheshech, Gimel Klippus Atmeis. Sai Mitzad the Shluchei Din, according to the first pshat, and Sai Mitzad the Tzimtzum, the Helam, that would have given an Asinas Mokim to all of the clippers, according to the second pshat. Right?
Right.
So he said there needs to be a Shitz Midas Arachim to avoid the fact. So we have a few reasons why there needs to be Shitz Midas Arachim. If we put all of the reasons together, in order there can be Teshuvah, in order that people shouldn't have to maintain an Aveda B'chol Meidecha in order to function, not to have to do Aveda V'Nisyonis, there shouldn't be Chatoin skiing, there shouldn't be, the hashpah should not go to the clippers. For all those reasons, there should be Zerachim. So in the Maimah Pakadeta Ha'aretz, it's given us a pshat of what that means, Shittim Midas Harachim. And in this first pshat, we're going to have two pshatim. Today we're going to do the second pshat. The first pshat of the Shittim Midas Harachim, what that looks like is that and it's only based on the second pshat in the middle section. It's only based on the pshat that Midas Hadin is a Helen V'Heston Elikus. We're not talking now according to the pshat of Shuv Yisrael, in which Midas Hadin is a Gilui V'Smoil Ha'Elyon, a Gevura. So that's where we're at. So we said that Midas Hadin, the Eibush wants to create the world Midas Hadin. And what does the world look like with the Midas Hadin? The Helen V'Hester. The Malchus, the Atzilus, the Spheres, the Oisius of Malchus, the Atzilus, a Mailim Umasti on the Oid, which itself is Na'ir Metzumsum Ma'oid. Because like we explained the Gevurus of Zah, like we explained the Yimach Mnei Atzeres, and Bechlal and the Binyan of Malchus, there is only what is Nimshach from the Test Spheres Al Yonis into Malchus is only the Malchus of each of those Spheres, we said. And we also said that even when there's a Yichud Zun Malchus, only a Ha'arich Itzoinis from Zah, and Malchus Bechlal is a Isius, which bechinas Yesh, and then Mailim Umaster on the Eir of Atzilus, to the point where there's no Gilui of Atzilus in Biyah. So we reiterated and we elaborated and we embellished the pshat of Midas Hadin the way it was explained in Lolo Ba'arav and B'Yimach Mnei Atzeres. But the shit of Midas Harachim is the pshat that instead of Malchus Atzilus being Mailim Umasti on the Eir of Atzilus, it now becomes the means by which it's Niskala to Eilam Biyah. So if it's not being Mailim Umasti, what is it doing? So we gave a moshel. We gave the moshel of a Rav who's mashpia to a Talmid Gadol, that even though he's being mashpia to him everything, he still needs to have an act of tzimtzum, but the tzimtzum is not a tzimtzum b'derech miyut or b'derech shinoi or any of those things. It's a tzimtzum in poshet just to be masada things, to put things in order. So it doesn't confuse the student. The student receives everything in a Mesudik fashion, give a share, and everything's in Mesudik fashion. And then the Talmud can understand. We can understand everything. There's no hell and best at all. The Eira Atzilus is Nimshach to Biyah. Such that you can say, just like Iyu v'chayu ichad in Atzilus, Iyu v'chayu ichad, Iyu v'chayu gamu ichad afilu, in Biyah. Just, And instead, this is Shaykh to Yimei Mashiach, and even now during Avodah, and this is an important thing to me. We talk about Yimei Mashiach, L'Asid Lavi. So on the one hand, we're talking here, we're getting into like a chronological thing. Pakadeta Ha'aretz, that was Lifnei HaKitrug. That was before Chetei Tzadas. Then you have Kozma Meshach HaGolus, and then you have L'Asid Lavi, where it returns to the Maila the way it was Lifnei Chetei Tzadas, Lifnei HaKitrug. That's how we describe the pasuk. Whereas beforehand, what was the Maimed Umatzah Pakadeta Ha'aretz when Lifnei HaKitrug, and then it was Peleg Elikim Moli Moim, the Malchus of Elikim, Malchus to Atzilus, which does the act of Peleg, does the act of Ischalkus, is Moli Moim, is full of oil, and there's no Tzimtzum Behalim, and there's no Shinui in the oil. So that's like a chronological thing, but there's also which is like it accepts the notion of a historical transition from different stages. But it's also in Aveda Gufa that a person can be in a Maimed Umatzav where there is a Gilui of Eir Atzilus in Eilam Biyah through his Aveda. Anyway, that was the first pshat. Yeah, that's where we're up to. But according to that pshat, the Ike Inyan is what? The Eir Atzilus. The Ike Inyan is Eir Atzilus. And whereas previously, Malchus Atzilus was the Keach HaHelim, Keach HaTzimtzum on the Eir Atzilus, now Malchus Atzilus serves as the Keach HaGilui. But in all this discussion, so in the pshat of the Medrash is the Eibush wanted to create the world with Malchus Da'atzilus being Mailim Master on Elikus, so that people could have everyone can be Yeshud of a Nifrod, and there can be Avedis and Isyanis. Rosh Hashanah is Kayim, Shiv Mizrachim. Not B'Shas Maisa. This is Lasid Lovi. Rosh Hashanah Ilam is Kayim. There's no way to run a world. Lasid Lovi, Shittim Mizrachim. Either Shittim Mizrachim, Lasid Lovi, Shittim Mizrachim, B'Schilas HaBriya, which was then reverted, or Shittim Mizrachim, B'Shas HaAveda. Whenever it is. The Shittim Mizrachim. The Shittim Mizrachim is the Pshat that now the main objective is Gilu Eira Hatzilus, Gilu Midas Harachamim, and Midas Hadin is a means to achieve that end. There's no desire to be Megala Midas Hadin anymore. That's changed. The Kavana has changed. The Kavana was Midas Hadin, and what you could get out of Midas Hadin. Now the Kavana is Midas Harachamim. We haven't deleted Midas Hadin. Midas Hadin now just it functionally helps as a tool in our for us to achieve this. Yeah, okay. That's what we said. It's the emphasis. The Hadgosha is the Mailas Ha'oir. The Mailas Ha'oir of Atzilus. That's where we're up to. So we're up to speed, yeah? Now comes along the end of the Maimah and says, V'oid yesh loimar. There's going to be some technical Kabbalah stuff as well in a second, so just pay attention. But don't get scared. V'oid yesh loimar. But furthermore, we can answer this question of what is the Pshat, Shit of Midas Harachamim. The Inyan told us Hashemayim v'ha'aretz. That when we're talking about the Toldos of Shemayim V'aretz, Hu l'mayla gam mikumoy shehoya koydem hakitrug b'shnei b'bechina shnei ha'meir hagdim. If we want to touch I didn't even bring in the midrashim about Toldos Shemayim V'aretz, that these ones have Toldos, but the previous ones didn't have Toldos. That when you have Shiddim Mizrachim, there's Toldos. There's what's the Pshat Toldos? There's Yichud Zal Malchus, and there's the Gilu of Elikus. What he wants to say now is that when we touch up Tilda Shemayim V'aretz, Eila Tilda Shemayim V'aretz B'yem V'aram B'yem Asayis Havai Elikim, the Shit of Midas Harachamim, it doesn't have to be like we just said, that the sum total of it is what? That everything goes back to the way it was Kedem HaKitruk, where you had Shnei HaMeis HaGedolim, and the Gilu in Malchus was the same as the Gilu in Zah. They both received from Ava, from Abba Ve'ema, from Chachma and Bina of Atzilus. And that way, there's no Tzimtzum Ha'oir. If there's no Tzimtzum Ha'oir, there's no Yeshus Ha'isius. And ultimately, the whole Gilu Eir of Atzilus can be Nimshach into Biyah. No. We can say it's even Lamaila than that. It's more than that. If you look in the Eitz Chaim, what does it say there? It says, it's talking there about 7 madregas that there are in Malchus. And Kosav, various aliyahs of Malchus. The aliyah ha'yoysa el-yena. What is the highest level that Malchus can be oila into? Says there in the Eitz Chaim that the very highest thing that Malchus can achieve is to be on a par, to be equal to Zah. That there's a Kesa Echad L'Shneim. That they're both equal. That Malchus is no longer in the Seder Ishtalshlus, Ma'adrega Tachtoina, lower than Zah. But Zah and Malchus are equal. That's what it says in the Eitz Chaim, which is going to be problematic for us. Because that's suggesting that the sachakol of everything, the most we're going to get out of all of this, so the shit of Midas Harachamim, the Aliyas HaMalchus, the transformation of Malchus that we're discussing, is it should be Shavah, just like we said in the first Pshat. We want to say here, no, it can be even higher than that. Malchus can be even higher than that. So the Eitz Chaim is a problem for us. And he's gonna try hard to fit it in with the Eitz Chaim, what he wants to say. Because the Eitz Chaim, from looking superficially, is saying this is what you're going to get. What the first pshat is the answer. That's what you get. If Malchus is going to be perfected, it's going to be just like Zah. It's the best you're going to get out of Malchus, which is what we described in the first pshat. Yeah, they were shavim b'keimosa. That the Zah and Malchus are makabel directly from Abba Ve'ema, which means that there's no tzimtzum. The gevurdas the kveikum Malchus chidaberu. The gevurdas Zah, which causes the Eimer Tzumson to be hemshekh into Malchus, which then makes Malchus into more of the Oisi is more of Bechinas Yeshus. You remember we described how when you have Tzimtzum Ha'oir, it causes Yeshus Ha'oisius. We explained at length in B'yemash Mini Atzeres. This is why I told you B'yemash Mini Atzeres is the key maimah. Because conceptually, for all of this to fit in, you need to understand B'yemash Mini Atzeres. B'yemash Mini Atzeres, where he does a tremendous amount of the intellectual effort to make sense of all of this. It'd be worthwhile going back, because probably at the time you didn't realize why it was so negeya. But you'll read it through and you'll realize everything it's saying over there is the fundamental grounding of what we're saying over here. And so Yemash V'Natzer is a key maimah. The Chatzachis, maybe is why the Rebbe Rashab did give some breaks between the Maimarim. He didn't say a Maim in the hemshekh on Simchas Torah and on Noach, but to give the Bachram a chance to really get B'yemash Mini Atzeres claring up, because what he was going to do next. Okay, so the Eitz Chaim seemingly says the language there fits in with what we said till now, the pshat that we first gave. And we want to say now even more. So how are we going to say even more? So, it says this in the Eitz Chaim that the seventh madrega is the madrega which we described in the first pshat. But in truth, there's a higher madrega. And what is that? And this is what is said in the Zohar, Pashas Truma. Al Pasuk Eishes Chayil Ateres Baila. So it says there on the Pasuk Eishes Chayil Ateres Baila. A woman of valor is the crown of her husband. Misitra the Alma the Osi, that on the side, in the time of the future world, the world to come. Lav ihi mona, she will not be mona lagabe. She will not be like a levush for him. V'lav misham shagabe, and she will not be a sexual partner for him. Ella atora al reishe, rather she will be a crown on his head. So whereas it's talking about Shechina, the Isha, which is the Shechina, which is Malchus, that no longer will it be a makabel from, no longer will Malchus be a makabel from Zah, but rather will be an Atora al Reish, will be a Kesa over Zah. So it will reach higher than Zah. Yeah? That's what it says in the Zohar. And similarly it says, Even Ma'asu Haboinim, Hoysal Reish Pina. We say in Hallel that the stone which was despised by the builders became a foundation stone, a Reish Pina, headstone, a foundation stone. V'hainu, what's this mean? Even is Bechinas Malchus. The stone we're talking about over here is Malchus. Stone, Doimim, Dibur, Isha, yeah, Aretz. Shehu Bechinas Even Shema'asu Habayim. This is the stone which was despised by the builders. Who are the builders? Chagas, Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes. They are the ones who cause the Binyan HaMalchus, right? But it was despised. So Tzimtzum, they only gave a Harich Tzeinis, Aymashakos V'Apatis, Shar Kinuyim, Peirik Dalet. And what happened to that Evan, which was Masu Habayim, the Chagas, Hoysel Reish Pina, became a Reish Pina, Lamayla Mikol HaEsosfiris, higher and above all the other Esosfiris. We have from the Zohar here an indication that Malchus can reach much higher than becoming equal to Zah. Whilst the Eitz Chaim says Shavim B'Kei Mosim is the seventh Aliyah of Malchus, the highest Aliyah of Malchus, from the Zohar here we have an indication that it can be even higher. In the Eitz Chaim itself says a similar thing. What does it say in the Eitz Chaim? In another place. Ki ates spiros hanakudin, the arich ampim. Imrad la, hem yud sefiros mekeirim v'shroshim l'chalatzilas. So he says there that the 9 sefiros in arich ampim, plus radla, the reisha delois yado, the atik, pnimis atik, they are the sort of the shirish of the 10 spheres of Atzilus. Avo metzias hamalchus lo yiniskal gala adayin ato. But the sort of the quality of Malchus is not revealed to us now. You know what Malchus will be, we'll find out later. The value is not, it's unakuda, it's behelim, it's tzimtzum. Uvezeh tov in mailas hamalchus. And from this you can understand the mile of Malchus. What's he saying over there? He's saying that the shirish of Malchus is in Radlah, whereas the other test spheres is shirish is in the test spheres of Arich Ampin. So that also indicates that Malchus is mushrish higher than the other spheres. So the Eitz Chaim himself is makir that. And it says, it's not niskala, but it will be. But it's a tov in Milas HaMalchus. From this you can understand Milas HaMalchus. Ki atorah b'reish tzadik. This is still in the Eitz Chaim. Ki atorah b'reish tzadik. Malchus is like a crown on the head of a tzaddik. V'haisa l'rish pina becomes like the head of the cornerstone. Yela osid oira gedoyla me'ashemesh akal l'sheni. So there he says, in the future, its oir is going to be even greater than the shemesh. So we were saying that the shnei oir is hagedoylim. Shemesh, levana, izon, malchus, and originally before the kitrug they had the same oir. Shavim b'kei masa, and that's what's going to be lasid lavei. And that's what he said earlier. From Shamit HaYereach, from the Eitz Chaim was saying that's the highest madrig of Malchus. The Eitz Chaim himself says no. They lost it lavei. The Eir HaLevon is going to be even greater than the Eir HaShemesh because it's mushrish higher. Uvamavi sha'arim chagimul chilek aleph perik aleph kosav ezel shaynoi nam achakach nigleis hamalchus misaid hayreish ilah mikulud leis yada. But afterwards, what's going to happen? Malchus is going to be niskala from its sheirish, from the sheirish of Reishad Leis Yoda, of Pnimius HaKeseh. Shulamayla mikol ha-tes spheres da arich ampin, which is even higher than all of the other tes spheres. V'zeu ha-eishes chayla teres baila, she'tiyah la'osid gedela me'ashemesh, and that's the pshat v'eishes chayla teres baila, that the woman is going to be a crown of her husband, that the moon is going to be higher than the sun. Meaning Malchus is going to be higher than the other spheres. So in the Movishar, that's how he explains it. So he explains the Eitz Chaim. Right, so it indicates that the Eitz Chaim himself is Maida of what he's trying to explain. So the Rosh Hashanah is doing a lot of work to make sure that even though it appears that from the Eitz Chaim, this pshat is beyond what Sifrei HaKabbalah are willing to accept, but with Chassidus he's going to relearn the Eitz Chaim, and the Eitz Chaim should be like Chassidus wants to say it. And so what do we understand from all this? What do we learn from this Eitz Chaim, the second Eitz Chaim? That Tesvirus that Silus from Chochmat Yisoid Shoshim Tesvirus da Arich Ampin. Avala Malchus Nilkecha Mirish Leis Yada Miradla Shlamayla Maila Tesvirus da Arich Ampin. V'lachein Haisa Leish Pina Lasid Lavi, and that's why it's going to become a Reish Pina, a cornerstone in Lasid Lavi. Shatir Gedoyla Me HaShemesh B'china Zah, which will be even higher than the Shemesh, which is a reference to Zah. So, how do you square the second Eitz Chaim with the first Eitz Chaim? First, he says that the highest aliyah of Malchus is it should be Shnei Me'iris Hagadelim Shavim became Mosin, just like Kedem HaKitrug, just like we explained in the first answer of Shittim and Tzarachamim. Do you mind asking them to put earphones on?
would seem is announced as.
You do. So what are we going to do with this first Eitz Chaim? So he does this. Sorry. B'torich loymar the masha kosu be'Eitz Chaim. Top of Amid Peites. B'torich loymar the masha kosu be'Eitz Chaim the tachlis ha'aliyah hu masha yushavim b'keim osam. That's what the Eitz Chaim said in Shamiyat HaYerech that we quoted first. That the highest aliyah of Malchus is the way that they should be shavim b'keim osam. Nichlal b'zegam mashu l'mayla mimenu v'chnes atar reishay. He's included within that aliyah. There are only 7 aliyahs, not 8 aliyahs. So 7 aliyahs, and the 7th aliyah is not just that. That's one of the aliyahs. It's that plus this extra aliyah which he talks about in the second Eitz Chaim, the aliyah which is atar al reishay. Okay, the shtikla deichik in the Eitz Chaim. So it's a good shaila. Why the Eitz Chaim Mechaber says one thing, one place, and the other thing. So you have to say, because he says this in the other. You could say the Eitz Chaim is like this, and then the Zohar is like this. Because the Eitz Chaim himself says this, then what does he mean? So, sorry, you have to say that he also includes this within what he was saying. All right. By only this negate so much, right? So if the Eitz Chaim did say this, that we're not going to lose any sleep about what the pshat in the Eitz Chaim is. But by the Rebbe Shabbos negate. But the inyan is that the Sheirish HaMalchus is higher than the Sheirish HaZah. And that's why, what we're going to say over here now, is going to say that the shit of Midas HaRachmim, which causes the Toldos, Shamayim Va'aretz, that there's Toldos, there's Gilui Likus, that everything is the way it should be, is talking about something even greater than what we said till now. Not that we should go back to the good old days of Shavim B'Kei Masam of Nea Kitrug. We're going to achieve something even bigger and better. What is this Toldos Shamayim Va'aretz then? What is the shit of Midas HaRachamim? Hu sheyoir bechinas sheirish u'mokir hamalchus k'mei shehu l'mayla mebechinas zah. That's the part. When we say shit of Midas HaRachamim, we're talking about that there's going to be a gilui of the sheirish u'mokir of malchus. Now we're back on familiar grounds, right? Now we had to sort of ignore, for the first part of this Maimah, everything we'd said till now, or at least everything we said in the first 2 Maimarim, about the Maila of the Guf, the Maila of Malchus, the Maila of Dibur, the Maila of Isha, and all those wonderful things we learned in the beginning, was, in a sense, negated by the shit of Midas HaRachamim of the first Pshat. The Oyesh Laimar goes straight back into that sugya and says, no, this is the Vart. We don't have to negate Malchus. The world was going to create Midas Adin and everything was going to be Behel and Vehester. What's going to happen? The shit of Midas HaRachamim is there's going to be a gilui of that kavana pnimis of Gvul, that kavana pnimis of Malchus, that kavana pnimis of Tzimtzum and Helem. And it's going to be Nitzgala. There's going to be a gilui of the thing that can't be Nitzgala. The Helem Ha'atzmi, the Atzmus Erin Seif. The Esem She'enim Nitzgala, that is going to be Nitzgala. Because Malchus is Mushrish and Atzmus Erin Seif. And that is the shit of Midas HaRachamim. The Midas HaRachamim is the type of Midas HaRachamim here is not an Ur Elyon. The Midas HaRachamim, the Pshat here is the Etzem Sheirish U'Mokir of Malchus. The Etzem Ha'Ur. Atmos Erin Seif. Atmos HaMo'or. As we're going to see. Okay. You ready? That line is important. Pizei Shleima. Inyan Tel D'Shmayim V'Aretz Hu Sheyair B'Chinas Sheirish U'Mokir HaMalchus K'mei Shul L'mayla M'B'Chinaso. Well, Inyan Hu. The concept is as follows. The Inyan is spoiler ill, but Dibur HaMasril B'Yom HaShmini Atzeres. What did we explain above? The Gam B'Chinas Gili HaKav Shemeir B'Atzilus U'Lamayla Me'Atzilus Hayu Gam Kim B'Chinas Yesh L'Gabi Erin Seif Lifnei HaTzimtzum. We explained Das Elyon, Das Tachtin. Das Elyon is L'Mayla Yesh L'Mata Ayin. Das Tachtin is L'Mata Yesh L'Mayla Ayin. Right?
Right.
And so we explained the Id Atmos Erin Seif is the Yesh Amiti. The Erin Seif Lifnei HaTzimtzum is the Ayin. That's Das Elyon. The Eir and Seif Shel Achra Tzimtzum is Ayin, and the Eilim Biyah, Malchus, and the Eilim Biyah is the Yesh HaTachtim. But then we went further, and we said that the critical transition point is in the Tzimtzum Arishin, between the Eir and Seif Shel Lifnei HaTzimtzum and the Eir and Seif Shel Achra Tzimtzum. The Gabi, the Eir and Seif Shel Lifnei HaTzimtzum, which is the Ayin, then the Eir and Seif Shel Achra Tzimtzum is B'chinas Yesh, because it's already a Shtickle Metzias. It's not Poshut. It isn't Poshut. It hasn't got the same Dveikus. Even the Etzem HaKav, every darga of the Eir Shel Achra Tzimtzum is already a Shtickle Yesh. It's Metzumtzum. It's through the Tzimtzum. It's the Eir which is to Noga Boya Tzimtzum. Yeah? So Lagabi, the Eir and Seif Shel Lifnei HaTzimtzum, that Eir, the Eir HaKav, is B'chinas Yesh. Dagam, the Sheirish HaMshachosim Lifnei HaTzimtzum, even though it was Nimshach from the Eir Shel Lifnei HaTzimtzum, Mikol Mokim, Harihu Nimshach Al Yedei HaTzimtzum. She'atzimtzum Poyel Boy, Liya is B'chinas Metzius Eir Al Kopanim. She'nase Makel Eilemis. It all becomes part of the process of Seidish Dalshus to make his Avis Eilemis. Begam Hu B'chinas Kav, Kotzum, Metzumtzum of Erech Eilemis. So the Kav is Kav Amida. For all of it, we push it again. Yemash Mini Atzeres gives you this whole thing in bucket loads. The calls there who bichlal am shachas to shame elikim b'chnas mitzadin. The whole thing is a mitzadin, a tzimtzum. Even though we say it's Shem Havaya, the whole Eratzilis is Havaya. Mikomokim who kumesha idavai nimshach aydei Shem elikim. Elikim doesn't just sort of all of a sudden begin in Malchus the Atzilis. In Malchus the Ein Sof is where it kicks in. Malchus the Ein Sof, from where there is the Tzimtzum Arishain, the Oisius of the Pnei Tzimtzum, and there's the Tzimtzum, and you have the Oish L'Achar Tzimtzum, even though it's a Eir and it's Kav, and we call it Eir Havaya and v'chuli, it's still all under the effect of Shem Elikim. There is a middle gvul to some extent. The Tzimtzum Arishin itself is Shem Elikim. Upoyel ba'Eir HaKav liyos kimahosai, and it affects the Eir HaKav, so it should be just like the Shem Elikim. Haino, what is that? B'chinas Metzius Eir, b'chinas Eir Metzumtzum should be Erech Eilemis. It impacts everything. There should be an Eir Metzumtzum. V'nimshach mimenu ha'Eir ba'Eilemis usviris. The B'chinas Midugvul. So the impact is such that the Eir is Nimshach in Eilemis, even a Pnimius, in a way of Midugvul, and the Spheres, that there's only so many Spheres, and each Sphere is not like the same other Sphere. If you even Eilemis for Spheres. In each Eilam you have different Spheres, and each Sphere is the Erech Eilemis. All of this, all of this is in B'Yamash Mini Atzeres. Rabbi Shav says, go back and relearn B'Yamash Mini Atzeres, and you'll have everything clear and what I'm describing over here. If so, Inyan shit of Midas Arachamim hu. What is the pshat then? Shit of Midas Arachamim. Sheyair bechinas ha'ir in seif shlifnei hatzimtzum. We're not talking about should be a gilo of Eir ha'atzilis and Eilamas biyah. We're talking more than that. We're talking about the Eir in seif shlifnei hatzimtzum should be meir achar hatzimtzum. Achagama Eisha Acharat Tzimtzum, Yeh B'chinas Bittul B'Metzias. She'ene B'chinas Metzias Nimtza Klal Kanal. The bittul that you have of the ayin of the Eir and Seif Shel Lifnei HaTzimtzum should be Meir Acharat Tzimtzum to the point where it'll also be bottle and won't be B'chinas Yesh. Lo B'chinas Eimet Tzumtzum B'chinas Middle Gvul. It won't have any of these Tzimtzum and Gvul. Omno Hamshach Azois. And where is this hamshach coming from? From Atmos Ein Seif. Above and beyond the Sheirish Mokar Akav. It's from the Sheirish Mokar Akav, then it has a sinus mocking for the Kav, and a sinus mocking for the Metzias, and a sinus mocking for the Yeshua Gvul. It's the Eir HaShayich Ala Ilamis. Even if not Tzimtzum. Etzemai, Spashas Eikumishul Atmai, Spashas Eikumishul Gabi Azulas, all of those daggers in Oy. We're not talking about, even in the Eir Seif Shel Lifnei HaTzimtzum, an Eir, which is the hispashus of the Eir, which is Shaykh al-Elamis, which ultimately there was the Tzimtzum. We're talking about Atmos Etzem Eir, Atmos HaMa'ir, Atmos Ein Seif. This is what's going to be nimshach and cause that everything should be bottle. Okay, more. Next paragraph. The Hinne. Nispoilil. What did we explain above? Where above? We explained how there are two targets in the Ein Seif Shnei Tzimtzum. Bechinas is Pashtus Ha'Eir, Be'etzem Ha'Eir. That you've been learning Bas Ligani Dalef from Stam. That you have the Pashtus Ha'Eir and the Etzem Ha'Eir. Ulamayla Mizeh, Be'ulamayla Mizeh, Bechinas Atzmus Ha'Mo'Eir. Shu Bechinas Ein Seif Yesh Amiti. So those are the targets we talked about, or Lifnei Tzimtzum. We said there's a Yesh Amiti. And then we have the ayin to the Ein Seif. In the Ein Seif itself, you have etzema and you have his pashtus. Hine hemshekh zakav hu mibechinas his pashtus. The sheirush hakav is in the his pashtus. Shu bechinas hagilu the Ein Seif. Because what is this pashtus? This pashtus is the pshat, the gilu of it. When it says the famous lines in the Eitz Chaim, which tell us all about the tzimtzum, it says there was an Eir Pashut which was mamalik kol hametzias. So even though it was an Eir Pashut, it was Mamalik Ol HaMetzias, it was a Hispashus Eir, it was a Gilu Eir. The only thing is that it was Bechinas Ayin. It was in such a state of Dveikus, it was Bechinas Ayin. Kanal B'dibur HaMaskil Anal. Like we said in Yemesh Mini Atzeres. Even though it's a Sheirish of Kav, in itself, it didn't have any of these aspects of Metzius that the Kav ultimately has is in having relationship. But afterwards, once it had been nimshach through the tzimtzum, that lifnei tzimtzum, which was the espashus ha'eir, through being nimshach al yidei tzimtzum, became an eir hakav, became an eir which had a reish, a seif, a mailo, a mata, and it was all the fierach ha'elamis. So if the goal is to have a hemshekh which doesn't have any of these aspects of being bibichinas gvul and midah, but should be bitul metzias, just like the ayin is lifnei tzimtzum, you can't have a hemshekh from hispashus ha'eir. It has to be it has to come from a tifra madrega than hispashus ha'eir. And the gilu day. Because from this is pashtus the tzimtzum is able to have a koyach over it. So if you want to have a hamshach where the tzimtzum does not have an impact on it, so that's only when you're going to be mamshech from the etzema. You could already say it's already a sheirush of some sort. Not quite this pashtus, but when you go to Atmas Hamoir, and we're going to Atmas and say, Yesh Amiti, Tini Hamshach, is ain't the poyel pulas at Tzimtzum. There, the Tzimtzum is not able to be poyel at Tzimtzum at all. The Daf, Bechinas is pashtus, Eli Yeshu, Bechinas is pashtus, Gil Levad, Lochem poyel b'zeh at Tzimtzum at Tzimtzum. Aval Bechinas Etzem, Shu Bechinas is pashtus, Shuhu, Bechinas Etzem Ha'oir, because in beginners atmos hamoid ein atimsum by klal misham nimshach lies beginners tastes eires bekav is kilo ein seichli beginners middel gvul beginners bitum is lagam. Okay, what's the pshat? So you understand when something is in the target in already in a, if it's tchunis to be in a state of gilu, it's nice in mokim for heder agilu. Every single thing what is the Hagdara? What is the, I don't want to say limitation, but what is the personality, what are the characteristics of something which is begilui? The characteristics of something to me begilui is that it's in contrast to being not begilui, which automatically indicates that within the context of its own being, it's Neisin Mokim, not only tolerates, it necessitates the notion of Heder Hagilui. You can't have Gilui without there being Heder Hagilui. When we talked about in the earlier Maimarim, we talked about how, I think we're talking in Eilei Shemayim Va'aretz actually, we talked about the difference between Bina and Chachma. That Bina, the understanding of something, immediately creates a sort of an irritation, an intolerance for the opposing view. So the proposition of being something is at the same time the acknowledgement and sometimes the bewilderment and the bafflement and the frustration and the irritation of its contrast or even its opposition. To be is itself a demand of not to be. Being and not being are necessary concepts for each one of them to exist.
Who said that?
This is what I'm trying to show. It's an edel of art. It's an edel of art to for something to be a proposition of anything. So we've said, and you remembered Baruch Hashem, we discussed the difference between etzim and a gilui. The etzim of a gilui and the etzim is the way the thing is in it for itself, and the gilui is the way legabi azulas. Right? So the gilui, when you talk about ispashus ha'oyer, lamaila, oyer and seish lifnei atimsum, it's mamala kol mokim mamala kol mokim hametzias, mamala kol hametzias, oyer poshu mamala kol hametzias. Ispashus ha'oyer lifnei atimsum. There was a reason why the Tzimtzum was able to be Matamtim Na'er, make an Erakav, which was going to be Mugbal and Midugvul. Why? Because once it was already Bespashus Ha'er, it was already the notion of Elikus the way is Lagabi Azulas. Azulas is the Pshat, something other than me. And Etzem is not begeder being for there to be a tefisas mokim for a zulas. Since the whole inyan of etzem is the way it is in itself, the zulas is not tefisas mokim. It's not the fact that I don't exist because somebody else exists. I don't exist in contrast to somebody else. That's already a gilui. It's not outward looking now. It's not chitzonius. It's pnimius. Legabi, the etzim is the only thing. So the spashtus ha'oyer, the tzimtzum was able to have ashpon because already a spashtus ha'oyer. Something that's already a spashtus has got in its makeup, in its DNA, the makeup that oyer tzimtzum is going to be the Metzias Azulas. Metzias Azulas is already Gvul and Hagbada. It can't be Azulas without there being Gvul and Hagbada. In order for something to be Azulas, there has to be a distinction between the Hischalkus, between me and you. That's the Pshat Zulas. There's a Hischalkus. So the Oren, which was a Pashut, Malaha Metzias. There was no Zulas. But the fact it was his Pashtus means there was an asinus makom for azulas. Through a tzimtzum, that oir was able to become a irakav, and the irakav is able to become spheres, and the spheres are able to be nimshach in kelim, and the kelim are able to be nimshach in parsa, and elam is biyah, and the three of us sitting around the table. So in order for that to be, we're talking about Shit of Midas Harachamim. We're trying to have a gilui of the Eish Lifnei Atzimtzum Shel Achrat Tzimtzum that doesn't just go, well, you don't just repeat the same story. The whole point of the Shit of Midas Harachamim is not repeating the same story. It's enhancing the story.
Okay.
So how are you going to enhance things? How are you going to change things? You have to have a gilui of the Ei, which is higher than the Hispashas Ei. The Etzem Ei. And not just the Etzem Ei, the Atmas HaMa'ei. Because the Etzem Ei also is a little bit not perfect for this purpose. You need to have the Atmas HaMa'ei, that Yesh HaMiti. So you have a gilui of the Yesh HaMiti and the Eirin Seif Shifnei Tzimtzum, Shel Achrat Tzimtzum, in a way that it's bottle Metzias, just like the Eirin Seif Shifnei Tzimtzum. That's the goal. So whereas at the end of Shuvah Yisrael and at the end of Yom HaShmini Atzeres, when we talked about Shidduch Midas Harachamim, we were talking there about there's this Gavaldika thing called Midas Hadin, but unfortunately people aren't perfect and so we can't go there. So we're going to water it down a little bit with Midas Harachamim. That was sort of the stopgap we sort of played at the end of those two memorim. Here we're going way, way beyond that. We're not watering anything down. You know, the mind Peshrim of the moshel of the second medrash of these like sort of lukewarm waters is not what we're talking about over here. We're talking about the world was created with Midas Hadin. What do you mean? From the Abish's machshava, you take create the world. The world was created with Midas Hadin. That's how it was. The way the world was described in B'yom HaShmini Atzeres, punkt as how the world was created. Shit of Midas Harachamim, through the Avodah of Torah, we're going to see that through the Avodah of Torah mitzvahs, you're going to be able to have Shit of Midas Harachamim. A gilu of Atmos Ein Seif Lamata. Where instead of it being a Halamasta, it's going to be on Elikus, it's going to be a gilu of Elikus. But not stam a gilu of Elikus of the, like it had in the first pshat, of the Esses First Atzilus. And not even the Ein Seif Lifnei Atzimtzum with the Mokir Akav, the Hispashas Ein, Atzmos HaMa'ir. And that's because why? Because the Sheirish Umokir HaMalchus. So it's not in spite of it, because he created the world Midas Hadin. And you have this whole Metzias HaMalchus, that through Malchus and everything that Malchus creates and Malchus impacts, and through the Avodah of all those things, you're going to be able to have a Gilu of Atmos Ein Seif.
So what's all Chiddush of Rosh Hashanah Skayim? And you can just that.
We're not emphasizing that so much yet. Well, let's see. Don't worry for the moment. I want you to think like this for the moment. When we get to the end, we'll put all the pieces together. V'zeu in Yintel the Shemayim va'aretz sheyumshach b'chinas yichud hazun b'chinas sheirish u'mokir hamalchus. In the yichud hazun, the toldos of Shemayim va'aretz, when you have a yichud zon malchus, we want that to be a gilui of the sheirish u'mokir hamalchus. Shezeu b'chinas teisvus eirus b'chinas zah. So we nimshach extra eirus in zah. The sheirish hamalchus will be b'chinas ein seif atmas muhus b'chinas atmas ha'ma'ir chuli. If you take Malchus and Zoh all the way back, which I think we did in B'yom HaShmini Atzeres, Zoh ends up being in the Sheirish HaMokir Akav, whereas Malchus is not Atmas HaMoy. We discussed that. Just like the Sheirish HaZoh is the same Sheirish of the Kav. The Inyan told us Hashamayim va'aretzu sheyagilui b'chinas hamalchus kamei shehi b'sharsha be'ein seif asmas muhus. B'liyah is eishes chayla teres baila sheyumshach gilui b'chinas ha'atzmas lamata be'elamis mireish kol dagin ad seif kol dagin. We want the gilu ha'atzmas, and that's going to be through being megala the sheirish ha'mokir hamalchus, the makabel. And all of the things that we talked about in the first two Maimarim of what Malchus and the Makabel are. Knesset Yisrael, Isha, Dibur, Chuli. Sheyiyu, bebechinas bittul ametzias legamri, ulamayla bebechinas midugbu. Everything should be bottled and not be mugbu. V'zeu agilu sheyiyu losid lovin. This is a gilu which we're talking about. Is going to be the gilu the way it will be losid lovin. This is the very highest madreg of Malchus. which is not to be shoving B'kei Moson like it would seem to mean from the Eitz Chaim and the way we explained it in the first Pshat, but rather it's going to be in our Torah al Reisha, it's going to be even higher than that. Yesh loimar b'derech efshe loimar sheze inyan peleg elikim olimim. So we could maybe, the Frierdiker Rebbe would say, but the Frierdiker Rebbe Rashab said something b'derech efshe, and then the Frierdiker Rebbe said it glattik. So the Rebbe said, I said it was derech efshe, and he says, boss, by dir the derech efshe is by miravadai. So the Rebbe Rashab is b'derech efshe loimar sheze inyan peleg elikim olimim. When we have in the pasuk, the peleg elikim, the ischalkus of malchus, is filled with water. That malchus itself should be full of its own water. Not like the way it's makabel from Zah, but the way it's makabel from its own sheirush u'makeh. Then it says in Mishlei that the land, and beforehand it says the Isha as well, the womb and everything, is lo yisava moyim, is not satiated from water. So Eretz is also always a reference to malchus. It's doimim, it's Eretz al Yaina. Bechinas mayim elu hainu bechinas zah bechinas gilu akav bichlal. When it says in the Mishlei that the land was not satiated from the water, which waters was the land not satiated from? Which hashpah was malchus not satisfied with? The hashpah from zah in the irakav bichlal. Ba'al zeh oma Eretz leisava mayim. Since Malchus originates in a much deeper shadish than even Zah, it wasn't satisfied, it wasn't satiated from what Zah was able to give it. Just gila but when it will be niskala the shadish of Malchus, then the peleg elikim, the eschalkus of malchus, will be ungefilled with Wasser, be full of water, its own water, and be satisfied with the water that it gets from sherish makir, and not just from the ashbach chitzonis it's getting from Zah and irakav bichlal. So that is the end of that maimah, which is the setting the stage for the finale, the final maimah. Now, the final maimah is a long maimah. Bichlal, it's probably when the Rebbe says in Tazrim Matzir Non Aleph to learn in Yonigul Mashiach, it says Pasha, this is in Yonigul Mashiach of the highest order. Pasha understand in Gilul Mashiach what's going to be like Mashiach comes. What is the implications? The Maim is long, the Maim is very involved, but very, very geschmack. And this pshat that we've just added in the end is going to be the pshat is going to explain. It's going to explain what this in a tremendous amount of detail, so we can understand. And that's why the whole hemshekh will come together. So you could say that Shuva Yisrael, the hemshekh could have, at least the way it gets to the end. There'd be no Shuva Yisrael, and there'd be no first half of Pakadeta. There'd be less toing and froing. It'd be easier for us. It's just got more complicated that way. But you've got to understand that the flow of the hemshekh is now completely put aside Shuv Yisrael, and it's put aside the first pshat of Pakadeta. That's not what we're talking about anymore. These are all alternative ways of thinking about things. And if you think about it in a lot of ways, like in some areas of Chassidus, you'll see when it's talking about what's the Tachlis Hashlemus will be the way it describes in the first half of Pakadeta, the first pshat in Pakadeta, the way it talks about in Shuv Yisrael. These the Oisius, in a sense, the Oisius of Shuv Yisrael and the Oisius of the first half of Pakadeta are more familiar Oisius that you'll find in Reva Chassidus. The inyan that is being explained over here is a much more radical and revolutionary idea, and it's not talked about. It's not as if like that is the common theme in Chassidus the whole time. It's there. I mean, some people don't even notice it's there, but it's there. I mean, it is in Shayichud ve'emunah, but most of the people who have an elementary understanding of Chassidus think it's all about his gavras hatzura ala chayma, that you have to koch in the nefesh lekis and in the ruchnius, and you've got to subdue the nefesh bahamis, at least in mahapich nefesh bahamis. But what do you mean mahapich nefesh bahamis to? So it should be like the nefesh lekis. The ikah hadgosha is in the ruchnius, is in the neshama, is in the oir, and that is a common sort of thread. What we're discussing over here is a much more intense idea about the profundity of Helem, the profundity of Tzimtzum, profundity of hemshekh, of Malchus, of Guf, and all of those aspects, which is going to be fully elaborated in the next Maimah, and yes, exciting times.